The city skyline glittered a backdrop of 1,000,000 untold stories. But tonight, one story was about to erupt. Inside a penthouse that scraped the heavens, a millionaire prepared to propose to his mistress, a ring nestled in velvet, promising a future built on secrets. He was oblivious to the storm gathering just floors below. His pregnant wife, a vision in a backless red gown, was ascending in the private elevator. Her heart, a symphony of betrayal and resolve. She wasn't coming to plead. She was coming to play a game he never knew had even begun, and she was holding all the cards. The penthouse felt less like a home, and more like a testament to a man's ego. Spanning the top 3 floors of the One Dalton building in Boston. It was a marvel of modern architecture and interior design, a palace in the sky that belonged to Damian Sterling. Tonight, however, it was more than just his residence. It was the stage for what he believed would be the defining moment of his new life. Damian adjusted the knot of his Tom Ford tie, his reflection staring back at him from the floor-to-ceiling windows. The city lights of Boston sprawled beneath him, a glittering carpet of ambition and dreams. His own dreams, he mused, were finally within reach. He was a man who had everything wealth that could rival the GDP of a small nation. A reputation as a ruthless but brilliant venture capitalist, and the kind of good looks that made even the most hardened cynics swoon. Tonight he was adding another trophy to his collection, a fiancée. Not just any fiancée, but a woman who in his mind was the embodiment of perfection. Her name was Isabella Rossi, and she was everything his wife was not. Isabella was vivacious, spontaneous, and utterly captivated by him. She was a rising star in the art world, her paintings selling for astronomical sums, her beauty as breathtaking as her talent. He glanced at the small velvet box, sitting on the polished obsidian of the grand piano. Inside rested a 7-carat flawless diamond ring, a bauble he had picked up without a second thought. The price tag as insignificant to him as a speck of dust. He imagined slipping it onto Isabella's delicate finger, her gasp of delight, the tears of joy welling in her emerald green eyes. A soft melodic hum reached his ears, and he turned to see Isabella emerging from the guest bedroom, a vision in a shimmering silver gown that clung to her curves like a second skin. Her fiery red hair was styled in loose waves that cascaded down her back, and her smile when it landed on him was pure, unadulterated adoration. "There you are," she purred, gliding towards him, her hips swaying with a dancer's grace. "I was beginning to think you'd forgotten about me." Damian's own smile was a carefully constructed mask of affection. "Never, my love. I was just admiring the view." He gestured to the city below, but his eyes never left her face. "It's beautiful," she breathed, nestling into his side. "But not as beautiful as what I see right here." Her hand slid up his chest, her fingers toying with the buttons of his shirt. He chuckled a low, rumbling sound that was practiced and devoid of genuine warmth. "You always know just what to say." He led her towards the dining table, a magnificent creation of glass and chrome that was laden with an extravagant feast. A private chef was adding the finishing touches to a dish that smelled of truffle and saffron. They dined in a bubble of feigned intimacy, their conversation a carefully choreographed dance of flattery and flirtation. Damian spoke of his latest business conquests, of the ifers he was building, and the rivals he was crushing. Isabella listened with rapt attention, her eyes wide with what he mistook for admiration. In reality, her mind was a whirlwind of calculations, her every move a strategic play in a game he was oblivious to. Isabella was no fool. She knew about Damian's wife, of course. The whole of Boston's high society knew about Amelia Sterling, the quiet, unassuming woman who was rarely seen by her husband's side. They called her the ghost wife, a beautiful but fragile creature who was content to live in the shadows of her husband's immense success. But Isabella had a secret of her own, a secret that was far more potent than Damian's infidelity. She had known Amelia long before she had known Damian. They had been friends once in a life that seemed a world away from this opulent penthouse. It was a friendship that had been shattered by betrayal, a betrayal that had set Isabella on a path of revenge, a path that had led her directly to Damian Sterling. As the chef cleared their plates and a sommelier poured them glasses of vintage champagne, Isabella's heart began to race. The moment was approaching, the moment she had been working towards for so long. She watched as Damian rose from his seat, his expression shifting from one of casual charm to one of serious intent. He took her hand, his thumb stroking her knuckles. "Isabella." He began, his voice a low, seductive murmur. "From the moment I met you, I knew my life would never be the same. You brought a light into my world that I never knew was missing." He was a master of words, a puppeteer who knew how to pull the right strings. But Isabella was no longer his puppet. She was the one holding the strings now. He reached for the velvet box on the piano, his movements slow and deliberate. He opened it, revealing the magnificent diamond that sparkled under the soft glow of the chandeliers. "Isabella Rossi," he said, his voice thick with a fabricated emotion. "Will you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" He sank to one knee. A gesture of supplication that was as hollow as his promises. Isabella's breath hitched, not from excitement, but from the sheer, unadulterated thrill of what was about to happen. This was it, the culmination of her meticulously crafted plan. She was about to give him her answer, an answer that would shatter his world in a way he could never have imagined. But before she could utter a single word, a sound pierced the carefully constructed silence of the penthouse. It was the soft, almost imperceptible chime of the private elevator, announcing the arrival of an unexpected guest. Damian's head snapped up, his brow furrowed in annoyance. He had given his staff strict instructions that he was not to be disturbed. Who would dare to interrupt his perfectly orchestrated proposal? The elevator doors slid open with a whisper, and a figure emerged from the shadows. A woman in a backless red gown that flowed around her like a river of molten lava. Her hair, a cascade of dark silken curls, was swept to one side, revealing a neck that was long and graceful. But it was her face that stole the breath from Damian's lungs. It was a face he knew better than his own, a face he had once loved, or at least a face he had once convinced himself he loved. It was Amelia, his wife, and she was pregnant. Her belly, round and full, was a stark contrast to the slinky, revealing dress she wore. It was a declaration, a statement that she was not the fragile, broken woman he had left behind. She stood there, poised and serene, her eyes the color of a stormy sea fixed on him. There was no trace of tears, no hint of hysteria. There was only a quiet, steely resolve that sent a shiver of unease down Damian's spine. Isabella, still on her knees, turned to look at the newcomer. A slow, triumphant smile spread across her face. The game had just begun, and the Queen had just made her move. The silence in the penthouse was a living entity, thick and suffocating. Damian, frozen in his kneeling position, felt as though the air had been sucked from his lungs. His mind, usually a sharp, well-oiled machine, sputtered and stalled. Amelia. Here. Now. It was a scenario so far beyond the realm of his calculated risks that he couldn't process it. He scrambled to his feet, the velvet box containing the 7-carat diamond slipping from his grasp. It hit the marble floor with a soft thud, the sound echoing the sudden jarring halt of his plans. Amelia. He managed his voice, a strangled whisper. What are you doing here? Amelia's lips curved into a faint, enigmatic smile. She took a step forward, the silk of her red gown whispering against the floor. Her gaze flickered from Damian's stunned face to Isabella, who was now rising gracefully, her expression a mask of feigned surprise. I could ask you the same thing, darling. Amelia replied, her voice as smooth and cool as the champagne in their glasses. She gestured towards the kneeling indentation Damian had left on the plush rug, then to the discarded ring box. A proposal, I presume. How predictable. The word spoken with such casual disdain was like a slap in the face. Damian flinched. He was a man accustomed to control, to orchestrating every detail of his life. To be called predictable, especially by the wife he had so thoroughly underestimated, was a blow to his ego. This isn't what it looks like. He stammered, the cliché tasting like ash in his mouth. Amelia raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. Isn't it? You on one knee, offering a diamond to your mistress, while your pregnant wife is supposed to be tucked away ignorant and weeping into her pillow. It looks exactly like what it is, Damian. A pathetic B-list movie scene. Isabella, seeing her cue, stepped forward, her hand resting on Damian's arm in a gesture of proprietary support. Who do you think you are, barging in here like this? She demanded, her voice dripping with manufactured outrage. Amelia's gaze shifted to Isabella, and for the first time a flicker of genuine emotion crossed her face. It wasn't anger, but something closer to pity. Oh, Isabella, she said, her tone laced with a weary sadness. Still playing the victim? I see. It's a role you've always excelled at. Isabella's face paled. I don't know what you're talking about. Don't you? Amelia's smile sharpened, turning predatory. We have so much to catch up on. Don't we, old friend? The words hung in the air, charged with unspoken history. Damian looked back and forth between the two women, a dawning confusion on his face. Friend, you two know each other. Know each other. Amelia let out a soft, humorless laugh. That's one way of putting it. We were roommates in college. Best friends, even. Before Isabella discovered her talent for acquiring things that didn't belong to her. The revelation hit Damian like a physical blow. He stared at Isabella, who refused to meet his gaze. The woman he thought he knew, the woman he was about to make his wife, was a stranger, a liar. His carefully constructed world was beginning to crumble, the foundations built on a web of deceit he hadn't even known existed. Is this true? He demanded, his voice low and dangerous. Isabella finally looked at him, her emerald eyes shimmering with unshed tears. But they were not tears of remorse. They were tears of fury. It's not what you think, Damian. She's twisting everything. She was always jealous of me, of my talent, of the attention I received. Was I? Amelia mused, taking another step closer. She was now standing directly in front of them, a formidable presence in her scarlet gown. Was I jealous when you stole my final project for our art history class, passing it off as your own, and winning the scholarship I had worked so hard for. Was I jealous when you started secretly dating my boyfriend, the first man I ever loved, and then flaunted your relationship in my face when I found out? Each question was a dagger piercing through the armor of Isabella's lies. She flinched, her composure cracking. "You're insane," she hissed, her voice trembling. "You have no proof." "Don't I?" Amelia's smile widened. She reached into the small beaded clutch she was carrying and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was old, the edges yellowed with age. She unfolded it, revealing a sketch, a beautiful, intricate drawing of a weeping willow. "Recognize this, Isabella?" Amelia asked, her voice soft but menacing. "It was the preliminary sketch for my final project, the one you lost. I found it tucked away in one of my old sketchbooks. A sentimental fool, I know." She then turned her attention to Damian, her eyes locking with his. "And as for you, my darling husband," she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, "you think you're the master of this game, don't you? The one pulling all the strings. But you're just a pawn. Damian. A pawn in a game you didn't even know you were playing." She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. Then she delivered the final devastating blow. "You see, I knew all about your affair. I've known for months. I was the one who anonymously tipped off the paparazzi about your little romantic getaway to St. Bart's. I was the one who sent that ridiculously expensive bottle of champagne to your table at Père Se, the one with the note that said, 'Enjoy your last supper.' And I was the one who made sure the private investigator you hired to follow me was feeding you false information, leading you to believe I was having a breakdown, when in reality I was gathering my own ammunition." Damian's face, already pale, turned ashen. He felt a wave of nausea wash over him. He had been played, manipulated, and outmaneuvered by the one person he had dismissed as weak and insignificant. But why, he managed to ask, his voice barely audible. Why go to all this trouble? Amelia's expression softened the hard edges of her anger, giving way to a profound sadness. "Because you broke my heart, Damian. You took the love I gave you and you trampled on it. You humiliated me. You disrespected me. And you underestimated me." And that, she said, her voice regaining its steely edge, was your biggest mistake. She then turned to Isabella, her eyes blazing with a righteous fury. "And as for you, you snake, you thought you could slither your way into my life, take what was mine, and get away with it. But you forgot one thing. I'm not the same naive, trusting girl you knew in college. I'm a woman who has been to hell and back, and I've learned how to fight fire with fire." With that, she reached into her clutch again and pulled out another item. This time it was not a piece of paper. It was a small silver USB drive. "This," she said, holding it up for them to see, "is my masterpiece. It's a collection of every email, every text message, every recorded phone call between the two of you for the past 6 months. It's a detailed account of your affair, your lies, and your plans to ruin me. And I've already sent a copy to every major news outlet in the country, as well as to the board of directors of your company." The color drained from Damian's face. His company, his empire, his entire life was built on a carefully crafted image of power and control. An image that was about to be shattered into a million pieces. He looked at Isabella, a woman he had been about to propose to just moments before, and saw her not as a lover, but as a liability, a co-conspirator in his own downfall. The penthouse, once a symbol of his success, now felt like a prison, the walls closing in on him. The city lights outside, once a testament to his ambition, now seemed to mock him a glittering reminder of everything he was about to lose. Amelia watched him, her expression unreadable. She had him exactly where she wanted him, broken, exposed, and utterly at her mercy. The game was far from over. In fact, it was just getting interesting. The immediate aftermath of Amelia's bombshell was a chaotic symphony of emotions. Damian, for the first time in his life, was speechless. He stared at the USB drive in Amelia's hand as if it were a venomous snake poised to strike. His mind, usually a whirlwind of strategic calculations, was a blank slate of pure, unadulterated panic. Isabella, on the other hand, reacted with the feral desperation of a cornered animal. "You're bluffing!" She hissed, her voice a mixture of fear and fury. "You wouldn't dare!" Amelia's lips curved into a chilling smile. "Try me," she said, her voice as cold as ice. "The press will have a field day with this. Millionaire mogul's torrid affair, with scheming artist exposed by pregnant wife. It has a certain ring to it, don't you think?" She then turned her attention back to Damian, her eyes narrowing. "And the board of directors at Sterling Industries. They're not going to be too pleased about this, are they? Especially when they find out you've been using company funds to finance your little love nest with Isabella." This was a new revelation, a fresh twist of the knife that sent another jolt of terror through Damian. He had been careless, so sure of his own invincibility that he hadn't bothered to cover his tracks. He had paid for the penthouse, the lavish gifts, the extravagant trips, all with a corporate credit card, a drop in the ocean of his company's vast wealth. But now that drop was about to become a tidal wave, threatening to drown him in a sea of scandal and financial ruin. How did you know about that?" He stammered, his voice barely a whisper. Amelia's smile widened. "You're not the only one with connections, Damian. I may have been a ghost wife, but I was never a fool. I have friends in places you wouldn't even dream of, friends who are more than happy to help a woman who has been wronged." She was referring to her father, a man Damian had always dismissed as a quiet, unassuming academic. What Damian didn't know was that Amelia's father was a retired forensic accountant, a man who could unravel a complex web of financial deceit with the same ease that others read a newspaper. He had been the one to uncover Damian's misuse of company funds, providing Amelia with the ammunition she needed to bring her husband's empire crumbling down. The weight of it all was too much for Damian. He stumbled backwards, collapsing onto the plush sofa, his head in his hands. He was a man who had built his life on a foundation of lies, and now those lies were being exposed one by one with brutal efficiency. Isabella, seeing her dreams of a life of luxury and power slipping through her fingers, turned on him, her voice laced with venom. "This is all your fault," she shrieked, her carefully constructed facade of sophistication shattering into a million pieces. "You were supposed to be smart, powerful. You were supposed to protect me, protect you." Damian looked up, his eyes filled with a newfound clarity. He saw her for what she truly was, a parasite, a beautiful, venomous creature who had latched onto him for his wealth and status. "You're the one who started this. You and your petty high school vendetta against Amelia." "It wasn't petty. Isabella," screamed, her voice raw with a rage that had been simmering for years. "She took everything from me. The scholarship, the man I loved. She deserved to suffer." "The man you loved?" Amelia interjected, her voice laced with a weary sadness. "You mean David? The boy who broke up with you 2 months after you started dating, because he couldn't stand your constant need for drama and attention. The boy who came to me in tears, apologizing for ever having hurt me." This was a truth that Isabella had buried deep, a truth that she had refused to acknowledge for over a decade. But now, in the harsh light of Amelia's revelations, it was impossible to ignore. The fight went out of her, replaced by a wave of utter despair. She sank to the floor, her silver gown pooling around her like a puddle of melted dreams. She was defeated, exposed, her carefully crafted world in ruins. Amelia watched the scene unfold with a sense of detached satisfaction. This was the moment she had been waiting for. The moment when the two people who had hurt her the most were finally forced to confront the consequences of their actions. But her victory was bittersweet. As she looked at the broken man on the sofa and the weeping woman on the floor, she felt not a surge of triumph, but a pang of emptiness. This was not the life she had envisioned for herself. She had wanted love, a family, a home filled with warmth and laughter. Instead, she had a penthouse filled with the wreckage of broken promises and shattered dreams. She took a deep breath, her hand resting protectively on her pregnant belly. This was not just about revenge anymore. This was about her future, about the future of her child. She turned to Damian, her voice now devoid of anger, replaced by a cool, businesslike tone. "Here's what's going to happen," she said, her words sharp and precise. "You are going to issue a public statement taking full responsibility for the affair. You will not mention Isabella by name. You will simply state that you made a grave error in judgment, and that you are committed to making amends." She then turned to Isabella. "You," she said, her voice hardening, "are going to disappear. You will leave Boston. You will change your name, and you will never contact me or Damian again. If I so much as hear a whisper of your name in this city, I will release the rest of the information I have on you. And believe me," she added, her eyes flashing with a dangerous light, "what I've revealed tonight is just the tip of the iceberg." Isabella, her face streaked with tears, could only nod in mute acceptance. She had no choice. Amelia had her cornered, and she knew it. Finally, Amelia turned back to Damian. "As for us," she said, her voice softening almost imperceptibly, "we are going to get a divorce. But it will be a quiet, amicable divorce. No drama, no scandal. We will present a united front to the public for the sake of our child." She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. "And in return for your cooperation," she continued, "I will not release the information about your misuse of company funds to the authorities. I will give you a chance to salvage what's left of your company, of your life." It was an offer of an alliance, a truce in a war that had left them all scarred. It was a lifeline, a chance for redemption, and Damian, in his state of utter desperation, grasped it with both hands. "I'll do it," he said, his voice hoarse. "I'll do whatever you want." Amelia nodded, a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes. "Good," she said. "I'm glad we understand each other." With that, she turned and walked towards the elevator, her red gown flowing behind her like a banner of victory. She had come to the penthouse as a victim, a woman scorned. She was leaving as a queen, the master of her own destiny. The elevator doors slid shut, leaving Damian and Isabella alone in the wreckage of their affair. The penthouse, once a symbol of their forbidden love, was now a tomb, a monument to their shared downfall. The game was over, and they had both lost. Or so they thought. The true game, the one for power, for survival, and for the future of the sterling legacy, had only just begun. The days that followed were a blur of carefully managed chaos. True to her word, Amelia orchestrated the narrative with the precision of a seasoned military strategist. Damian, stripped of his usual arrogance, became a surprisingly pliant puppet. He issued a public statement, a masterpiece of corporate contrition, admitting to an unspecified personal failing and vowing to focus on his family and his company. The media, hungry for a villain, was momentarily placated, their attention diverted by the carefully worded apology. Isabella, as promised, vanished. One day she was the talk of the Boston art scene. The next she was gone, her gallery representation rescinded, her social media accounts deleted. It was as if she had never existed. Amelia, through her discreet but powerful connections, had ensured her erasure was swift and absolute. The divorce proceedings were initiated, handled by a team of high-powered lawyers who operated under a strict non-disclosure agreement. The terms were generous, but with a crucial clause: Amelia would retain a significant non-voting stake in Sterling Industries, a golden handcuff that kept Damian tethered to her, a constant reminder of her power. But behind this facade of controlled demolition, a new, more complex game was unfolding. Amelia, having tasted power, found that it suited her. She had spent years in Damian's shadow, her own considerable intellect and business acumen dismissed and ignored. Now she was stepping into the light, not as a vengeful ex-wife, but as a formidable player in her own right. She began to quietly cultivate relationships with key members of the Sterling Industries board, the very people she had threatened to expose. She didn't use blackmail or coercion. Instead, she used her knowledge, her sharp insights into the market, and her understanding of the company's weaknesses that Damian, in his hubris, had overlooked. She met with them for discreet lunches at the Capitol Grill, a world away from the flashy, trendy restaurants Damian frequented. She spoke their language, the language of profit margins, of market trends, of long-term growth. She presented them with a vision for the future of Sterling Industries, a vision that was more stable, more sustainable, and ultimately more profitable than Damian's high-risk, high-reward approach. One of her key allies was a man named Arthur Vance, the oldest and most respected member of the board. He had been a friend of Damian's father, and had always been wary of Damian's reckless ambition. He saw in Amelia a reflection of her father-in-law's prudence and foresight. "Your husband is a brilliant but undisciplined force of nature," Arthur told her during one of their lunches, his shrewd eyes studying her over the rim of his water glass. "He builds empires on foundations of sand. You, on the other hand, understand the importance of bedrock." Amelia, her baby bump now more pronounced under a chic, tailored dress, simply smiled. "I believe in building things that last, Arthur. For the sake of my child, and for the sake of the legacy that my child will one day inherit." It was a masterstroke, framing her ambition not as a power grab, but as a mother's desire to protect her child's future. It was a narrative that the old guard, family-oriented members of the board could understand and support. Damian, meanwhile, was adrift in a sea of his own making. The affair had been a symptom of a deeper malaise, a boredom with his own success, a need for constant stimulation and validation. Now, stripped of his mistress and under the watchful eye of his estranged wife, he felt a sense of emptiness that his vast wealth could not fill. He tried to throw himself back into his work, but the fire was gone. His usual ruthlessness was tempered by a newfound caution, a fear of making another misstep that would give Amelia more leverage. He found himself second-guessing his own decisions, his instincts blunted by the knowledge that he was no longer the sole master of his universe. He watched from the sidelines as Amelia's influence grew a silent, creeping power that was slowly but surely reshaping the company he had built. He saw the subtle shifts in the board's allegiance, the way they now deferred to her judgment, the way they sought her counsel on matters that had once been his exclusive domain. He felt a grudging respect for her, a respect that was tinged with a bitter resentment. She had outplayed him, outmaneuvered him at every turn. The quiet, unassuming woman he had married had revealed herself to be a queen in disguise, a political operator of the highest order. The tension between them came to a head during a tense board meeting to discuss a major acquisition. Damian was advocating for a hostile takeover of a rival tech firm, a bold, aggressive move that was typical of his style. Amelia, however, argued for a more strategic approach, a partnership rather than a conquest. A hostile takeover will create a toxic work environment and alienate their top talent. She argued, her voice calm and measured, but with an underlying authority that commanded attention. A strategic alliance, on the other hand, will allow us to leverage their innovation while maintaining our own corporate culture. It's a win-win, not a zero-sum game. Her argument was logical, well-researched, and ultimately more persuasive. The board, led by Arthur Vance, voted in her favor, leaving Damian isolated and defeated. That evening he found her in the library of their sprawling mansion, the one part of the house they still shared a neutral territory in their Cold War. She was reading a book on corporate governance, a glass of sparkling water on the table beside her. "You've been busy," he said, his voice laced with a sarcasm that did little to hide his frustration. Amelia looked up, her expression unreadable. "I'm just trying to protect my investment," she replied, her voice cool and even. "Your investment, eh?" he scoffed. "You mean my company. Our company. Damian," she corrected him gently. "Or have you forgotten the terms of our agreement?" He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of exasperation. "What do you want, Amelia? What's your end game here? You have the money. You have your freedom. Why are you still here meddling in my business?" She closed her book, her gaze meeting his. "Because it's not just about the money, Damian. It's about respect. It's about proving to you and to myself that I am more than just the woman you cheated on. I am a force to be reckoned with." She rose from her chair, her pregnant belly a prominent silhouette against the firelight. And besides, she added a faint, almost imperceptible smile, playing on her lips. "I'm not done with you yet. The game is far from over." She left him then alone in the library, with the ghosts of his past mistakes, and the unsettling realization that his future was no longer his own. He was a king in a gilded cage, a puppet whose strings were being pulled by the very woman he had tried to cast aside. And as he watched her go, he felt a strange, unfamiliar emotion stirring within him. It wasn't just respect or resentment. It was fear. Fear of the woman his wife had become, and fear of what she was capable of. The backless red gown had been a declaration of war, but her quiet, calculated rise to power was proving to be far more devastating than any single dramatic confrontation. Life settled into a strange, tense rhythm. The divorce was finalized, a quiet affair that barely made a ripple in the society pages, a testament to Amelia's masterful control of the narrative. She moved out of the marital mansion and into a chic, modern brownstone in Beacon Hill, a home that was all her own, paid for, with the generous settlement from the divorce. But her connection to Sterling Industries remained a constant, looming presence in Damian's life. She attended board meetings via video conference, her image projected onto a large screen, a virtual queen overseeing her domain. Her contributions were always sharp, insightful, and much to Damian's chagrin, usually right. The company under her stabilizing influence was thriving, its stock price climbing to new heights. Damian, however, was a man adrift. He had lost his edge, his appetite for the ruthless, high-stakes game of corporate warfare. He found himself going through the motions, his days a monotonous cycle of meetings and paperwork. He was a king in name, only his power checked at every turn by the woman he had once dismissed as a fragile, insignificant creature. And then a new player entered the game, a ghost from a past Damian had tried to bury. It started with a series of anonymous emails sent to his private account. They were cryptic at first, just a single word or a phrase that seemed to have no meaning. But then they became more specific, referencing deals and conversations that had taken place years ago, details that only a handful of people would know. Damian initially dismissed them as a prank, a disgruntled former employee trying to rattle his cage. But then an email arrived that made his blood run cold. It contained a single attachment, a photograph. It was a picture of a young woman, her face partially obscured by shadows, but her eyes, wide and fearful, were unmistakable. It was a face he had tried to forget, a face that haunted his nightmares. The woman's name was Chloe, and she had been his assistant a decade ago, back when Sterling Industries was just a fledgling startup. She had been bright, ambitious, and utterly devoted to him. And he, in his arrogance and recklessness, had exploited that devotion, luring her into an affair that had ended in tragedy. Chloe had become pregnant, and in a moment of panic, Damian had pressured her to have an abortion, threatening to ruin her career if she refused. Devastated and alone, Chloe had quit her job and disappeared. A few months later, Damian had received a letter from her parents, informing him that she had taken her own life. It was a secret he had carried for 10 years, a dark, ugly stain on his soul. He had paid her parents a substantial sum of money to ensure their silence a transaction that he had disguised as a charitable donation. He had convinced himself that he had buried the past, that it could never come back to haunt him. But now it was clear that someone else knew. Someone who was using that knowledge to torment him, to unravel the carefully constructed facade of his life. His first suspect was Isabella. He imagined her bitter and vengeful digging into his past, looking for a weapon to use against him. But he quickly dismissed the idea. Isabella was a narcissist, not a strategist. This was too subtle, too calculated for her. His next thought inevitably was Amelia. Had she, in her quest for revenge, uncovered this dark secret from his past? It was a chilling thought, but it didn't quite fit. Amelia was playing a long game, a game for power and control. This felt different, more personal, more sadistic. The emails continued, each one more menacing than the last. They contained excerpts from Chloe's diary passages that spoke of her love for Damian, her heartbreak and her despair. They were intimate, personal details that only Chloe herself could have known. Damian was coming undone. He became paranoid, suspicious of everyone around him. He had his office swept for bugs, his computer scrubbed by cybersecurity experts. But the emails kept coming, a relentless psychological torture that was pushing him to the brink of a breakdown. He finally confided in Arthur Vance, the one person he felt he could trust. He told him everything: the affair with Chloe, the pregnancy, the suicide. He laid bare the ugliest chapter of his life, a confession that left him feeling raw and exposed. Arthur listened in silence, his expression grim. When Damian was finished, the old man sighed, a sound of profound disappointment. "I had hoped the rumors weren't true," he said, his voice heavy with a weary sadness. "Rumors?" Damian asked, his heart sinking. "There were whispers back then," Arthur admitted. "Nothing concrete, just office gossip. But it was enough to make your father worry. He was the one who insisted on bringing me onto the board to keep an eye on you." This was another revelation that shook Damian to his core. His own father had not trusted him, had seen the darkness lurking beneath the surface of his ambition. "I think I know who's behind this," Arthur said, his voice low and serious. "And it's not who you think." He then told Damian a story that made the blood drain from his face. Chloe had a brother, a younger brother who had idolized her. His name was Ethan, and he had been devastated by his sister's death. He had never believed the story of her suicide, had always suspected that Damian was somehow responsible. Ethan, it turned out, was a tech prodigy, a brilliant but troubled young man who had spent the last decade honing his skills as a hacker, nursing a burning desire for revenge. He had been a ghost watching Damian from the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. "He's not after your money," Damian Arthur warned. "He's not after your company. He wants to destroy you, to dismantle your life, piece by piece, just as you dismantled his." The realization hit Damian with the force of a physical blow. He was not being blackmailed. He was being hunted. And his hunter was not just a disgruntled ex-lover or a vengeful ex-wife. He was a man with nothing to lose, a man who was driven by a grief that had festered into a dangerous, all-consuming obsession. The game had changed once again. It was no longer a battle for control of a corporation. It was a fight for his very survival. And in a strange, ironic twist of fate, the one person who might be able to help him, the one person with the strategic mind and the ruthless cunning to match Ethan's, was the woman he had so carelessly wronged. He had to go to Amelia. He had to confess everything, to lay bare all his secrets, and to beg for her help. It was a humiliating prospect, a complete reversal of the power dynamic that had defined their relationship. But he had no other choice. He was trapped in a nightmare of his own making, and Amelia was his only hope of waking up. The question was, would she help the man who had shattered her world, or would she watch with a cold, detached satisfaction as he was consumed by the ghosts of his past? The drive to Amelia's Beacon Hill brownstone was the longest journey of Damian's life. Each red light, each traffic jam, felt like a personal affront, a delay in the inevitable humiliating reckoning that awaited him. He rehearsed his confession over and over in his mind, the words tasting like poison on his tongue. He found her in her garden, a small, beautifully manicured oasis of green in the heart of the city. She was kneeling on a cushioned mat, tending to a bed of roses, her pregnant form a picture of serene domesticity. It was a stark contrast to the chaos that was raging inside him. She looked up as he approached, her expression a mixture of surprise and wariness. "Damian," she said, her voice cool and guarded. "To what do I owe this unexpected pleasure?" He didn't waste time with pleasantries. He launched into his confession, the words tumbling out of him in a torrent of fear and desperation. He told her everything about Chloe, about the pregnancy, about the suicide, about the emails, about Ethan. He held nothing back, laying bare the full, ugly extent of his past transgressions. Amelia listened in silence, her face an unreadable mask. She didn't interrupt, didn't ask questions. She simply let him speak her gaze, never leaving his face. When he was finally finished, the silence that followed was heavy and profound. He expected an outburst, a tirade of condemnation. He expected to see disgust, revulsion, a final definitive rejection. What he saw instead was a flicker of something he couldn't quite decipher, a complex emotion that was somewhere between pity and a cold, calculating assessment of the situation. So she said finally, her voice devoid of any discernible emotion. The great Damian Sterling, brought to his knees by the ghost of a dead girl and her vengeful brother. Her words were a slap in the face, but he didn't flinch. He deserved it. He deserved all of it. "I need your help, Amelia," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "I don't know what to do. He's going to destroy me." She rose to her feet, brushing the soil from her hands. She walked to a small wrought-iron table and poured herself a glass of water. She took a long, slow sip, her mind clearly working, processing the information, analyzing the angles. "And why should I help you?" she asked, her back still to him. "You, the man who cheated on me, who lied to me, who was about to replace me with my childhood nemesis. You, the man who I now discover is responsible for the death of a young woman who was carrying his child. Give me one good reason why I should lift a finger to save you from the fate you so richly deserve." It was the question he had been dreading, the question for which he had no answer. He couldn't appeal to her love, or her loyalty, or her sense of shared history. He had destroyed all of that. So he appealed to the one thing they still had in common, their child. "Do it for our son," he said, his voice thick with a genuine, unfeigned emotion. "He doesn't deserve to have a father who is a pariah, a man whose name is synonymous with scandal and death. He deserves a father. He can be proud of a father who has atoned for his sins." He saw her shoulders tense, the first sign of a crack in her icy composure. She turned to face him, her eyes for the first time betraying a hint of the turmoil that was raging within her. "Don't you dare use our child as a bargaining chip," she said, her voice low and dangerous. "I'm not," he insisted, taking a step towards her. "I'm telling you the truth. I want to be a better man, Amelia. For him. For you." The last two words slipped out unbidden, a whisper of a truth he hadn't even acknowledged to himself until that moment. In the midst of his downfall, in the face of his own mortality, he had come to realize what he had lost. He had lost not just a wife, but a partner, a confidant, a woman whose strength and intelligence he had so foolishly underestimated. Amelia's expression softened, almost imperceptibly. She saw the desperation in his eyes, the genuine remorse. She saw a man who had been stripped of his arrogance, his pride, his carefully constructed defenses. She saw a man who was broken, and in that brokenness she saw an opportunity. "This Ethan," she said, her voice shifting to a more businesslike tone. "He's a hacker, you said?" Damian nodded. "One of the best, according to Arthur. And he's using his sister's diary as his primary weapon." "Yes. He's releasing it in pieces, tormenting me with it." Amelia was silent for a moment, her mind racing. A diary is a narrative she mused more to herself than to him, and a narrative can be rewritten. A slow, cunning smile spread across her face, a smile that sent a shiver of both fear and hope down Damian's spine. It was the smile of a grand master who sees the entire chessboard, who anticipates every move, who knows how to turn a losing position into a stunning, unexpected victory. "All right, Damian," she said, her voice now firm and decisive. "I'll help you, but not for your sake and not even for our son's sake. I'll help you because this is a game I find interesting, and it's a game I intend to win." She extended her hand, not as a wife, not as a lover, but as a business partner. "We have an alliance," she said, her eyes locking with his. "An unholy alliance, perhaps, but an alliance nonetheless." and here are my terms." The terms were brutal. She demanded full voting control of Sterling Industries. She demanded that he step down as CEO, remaining on as a figurehead, a chairman with no real power. She demanded that he place a significant portion of his personal wealth into a trust for their son, a trust that she alone would control. It was a complete and utter surrender, a ceding of his entire empire to her. But he didn't hesitate. He had no other choice. "Done," he said, taking her hand. Her grip was firm, her hand surprisingly warm. "Good," she said, a flicker of triumph in her eyes. "Now tell me everything you know about Ethan, his habits, his weaknesses, his digital footprint. We're going to hunt the hunter. We're going to find him. We're going to confront him. And we're going to give him a new story to tell. A story of his sister's tragic, accidental death. A story that will absolve you, and a story that he will have no choice but to believe." It was an audacious, breathtakingly ruthless plan. It was a plan that involved deception, manipulation, and the weaponization of a dead woman's memory. It was a plan that was morally bankrupt, and yet in its sheer, cold-blooded brilliance, it was Damian's only hope. He had come to her as a penitent begging for forgiveness. He was leaving as a co-conspirator, a partner in a scheme that was darker and more twisted than anything he could have ever conceived on his own. He had unleashed a force he could not control, a queen who was not content with just a piece of the kingdom, but who wanted the entire empire. And as he walked away from her Beacon Hill brownstone, he knew that he had just made a deal with the devil. But he also knew that for the first time in a long time, he had a fighting chance. The game was afoot, and he and Amelia, the most unlikely of allies, were about to make their first move. The story of Damian and Amelia is a twisted tale of love betrayal and the intoxicating allure of power. It's a reminder that the quietest person in the room is often the most dangerous, and that the past, no matter how deeply buried, always has a way of clawing its way back to the surface. But their story is far from over. The unholy alliance they have forged is as fragile as it is formidable, and the game they are about to play with a grief-stricken, vengeful hacker is one with no rules and no guarantees. What do you think will happen next? Will Amelia's ruthless plan succeed? Or will Ethan the ghost in the machine prove to be a more formidable adversary than they could ever have imagined? Let us know your theories in the comments below. And if you want to find out what happens next in this saga of wealth, power, and revenge, make sure you like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our channel for more Millionaire drama. You won't want to miss the next chapter. A swirl of frost-laced wind hits Daniel's face the moment he steps out of his car, black coattails flapping against the flurry of snow. The Winter Ball has been the most anticipated event of the year, a glittering palace of music, rich wines, and elite company. But for Daniel, it's another stark reminder that he's walking in alone. He steels himself, determined not to let memories of the past taint his evening. Then across the ballroom's grand foyer, he catches sight of her Eleanor, his ex-wife. She isn't alone. She's holding the hands of 4 children who each carry the exact color and shape of his own eyes. The Winter Ball took place in the heart of Manhattan at the luxurious Plaza Hotel near Central Park. Crisp December air clung to Daniel White's every breath as he made his way past doormen who greeted him with polite nods. The swirling lights of the city reflected on the fresh snowfall, granting an almost fairy tale aura to the evening. Inside, the hotel's lobby dazzled with poinsettias, golden wreaths, and artful Christmas trees. The florid notes of a string quartet wafted through the corridor, luring him toward the grand ballroom. Daniel, 37 years old, had always been considered dashing. Tall, with a chiseled jaw and haunted green eyes, he moved with a confident grace that came less from ego and more from an innate sense of self. Yet tonight, an uninvited pang of loneliness gripped his heart. Attending the ball alone was never his plan. Just a year ago, he had imagined standing here with his wife Elena on his arm, both of them in elegantly tailored outfits, exchanging polite smiles with Manhattan's elite, forging connections for their philanthropic endeavors. But life had taken a brutal turn. He and Elena parted ways under painful circumstances that still felt raw. Despite the veneer of normalcy, he attempted to wear Tom Ford suit perfectly, knotted tie, polished demeanor. Daniel felt like an open wound in the midst of a glittering crowd. Every decoration, every swirl of laughter, every passing perfume reminded him of the life he had lost. He tried to distract himself by thinking of small talk about his work at Harrington and White Investments, about the latest Wall Street Journal headlines about the real estate deals the firm had lined up. He thought of the people he might meet tonight. Potential clients, old friends, distant acquaintances like Teresa Wilson from his days at Yale, and donors who might support his cherished cause, the foundation he'd created in honor of his late father to fund scholarships for underprivileged kids. The grand double doors to the ballroom stood open, revealing a dazzling space, sparkling chandeliers, marble floors, and swirling couples in formal attire. As Daniel stepped across the threshold, he felt both an unsettling excitement and a sense of dread. Somewhere in this crowd, there could be a face from the past. Elena's face, perhaps, but in the swirl of suits and gowns, he couldn't immediately see her. He exhaled slowly, reminding himself that this evening was meant to be a fresh start, or at least a test of his ability to move on. After all, Elena had carved her own path, seemingly uninterested in the shared dreams they'd once built. He clenched his fists in his pockets. This night is for me, he thought. I'm going to enjoy myself, come what may. Daniel's mind drifted back to the day he first met Eleanor. It was during a summer internship at a hedge fund in Boston, back when they were both wide-eyed graduate students. She was bold, brilliant, and carried an aura of mystery that captivated him. Elena's luscious dark hair framed her olive complexion, and her deep brown eyes flashed with ambition. She had come from a modest background in Montreux, Switzerland, and her accent, along with her fierce determination, made her stand out among the crowd of interns. Their attraction was instant, fueled by late-night strategy sessions and stolen glances at coffee breaks. By the end of the internship, they'd begun a relationship that seemed as bright and promising as their future careers. Within 2 years after they'd finished graduate school, he at Yale, she at Columbia, they married in a private ceremony officiated at a small chapel in upstate New York. His mother, Carol White, and her father, André de la Montagne, blessed the union with tears of joy. Yet as they built their careers, cracks began to form. Both were ambitious. Both wanted the best for themselves, and ironically, that drive which once unified them started to push them apart. Eleanor felt stifled by the conventional life Daniel seemed to desire, a suburban home, dinner parties, early nights. Meanwhile, Daniel struggled to keep up with Eleanor's relentless push for success and adventure. She took job opportunities in Hong Kong and Zurich, while Daniel remained in New York to care for his ailing father and to stabilize his fledgling investment firm, Harrington and White, which he co-founded with his best friend from college, James Harrington. Long, silent months apart replaced the passion they once shared. Emails and texts became the main medium of communication. The final blow came when his father passed away, and Elena didn't show up to the funeral. She was stuck in a negotiation in Shanghai, or so she claimed. Daniel never forgave her for that. The day after the funeral, he filed for divorce. The year since the divorce was granted felt like a haze of regrets and half-hearted attempts to move forward. Daniel's mother tried to console him. James Harrington tried to bury him in work, hoping he'd forget his heartbreak in corporate success. But the hurt ran deep. He wasn't just losing Elena. He was losing the idea of the family he had so desperately wanted to build, the stability he had vowed to create, a vow that was broken. Little did he know that this fateful night at the winter ball would unravel secrets that would cut deeper than he ever imagined. A month ago, Daniel had almost declined the invitation to the winter ball. The event, hosted annually by New York's philanthropic circle, was a magnet for the richest and most influential personalities. It was a chance to mingle, to raise money for various causes, and to flash power and status. Harrington and White had been a chief sponsor for the past 3 years. Daniel James Harrington had told him, "We can't skip it. Our firm's entire public relations campaign is anchored on us being present front and center. This is how we attract high-profile clients." Daniel, sitting behind his mahogany desk, stared at the invitation's gold-trimmed edges. The bold lettering read, "Winter Ball, an evening of giving and glamour." He sighed. "I just don't feel up to it, James." His partner, a tall man with sandy hair and an unrelenting optimism, placed a hand on Daniel's shoulder. "Look, I know you've been through a rough patch, but it's time to step out there again. If you don't, you'll never move on." Daniel had half a mind to crumple the invitation. Memories of attending this event with Eleanor the previous year, dressed in matching midnight blue ensembles, dancing under the chandelier, celebrating the expansion of their philanthropic network, still haunted him. Back then, the final stage of divorce was looming, even if they pretended all was well in front of the cameras. But James had a point. Daniel's philanthropic foundation needed exposure, and the firm needed him to show that he was still the confident leader they all relied on. Perhaps the winter ball could mark a turning point, a chance to re-enter society with his head held high. After all, what were the odds Elena would be there? She'd been traveling the world, seemingly unconcerned with the philanthropic circuit in New York. Reluctantly, he wrote out his acceptance, sealed the envelope, and sent it back. The next day, he forwarded his measurements to his tailor for a new suit, an outward sign that he intended to move forward, even if his heart still lagged behind. The clink of champagne glasses and the resonant echoes of string instruments filled the grand ballroom. Women in sweeping satin gowns floated on the arms of men in crisp tuxedos. A faint scent of pine from the holiday decorations mixed with the sweet aroma of desserts placed at the buffet table. Daniel tried to relax by the refreshment station, swirling a glass of sparkling water. He was never one for too much alcohol, especially not when he needed to keep his wits about him. Around him, clusters of socialites murmured gossip and speculation. Teresa Wilson, a college acquaintance now working for the New York Times, offered him a polite nod from across the room. He returned the gesture, but avoided prolonged eye contact, not in the mood for an in-depth conversation. His eyes scanned the dancing couples, the swirl of color and elegance. Usually he'd find it all mesmerizing. The soft glow of chandeliers overhead, the confident laugh of donors proud to share their wealth, the swirl of philanthropic ambition that actually did some good in the world. But tonight, an uneasy tension weighed on him. Something about the air felt thick as though the energy in the room was brimming with revelations waiting to be spilled. He stepped away from the crowd, weaving through elegantly dressed men and women. A group of corporate bankers from Goldman Sachs tried to engage him in talk about the stock market's recent fluctuations. Another small cluster from a tech startup pitched their new app. He feigned interest, made a few polite remarks, but found himself inching toward the corner of the room where a sense of quiet serenity reigned, just as he took a seat at a small table beside a pillar draped in silver garlands. His gaze drifted over the dance floor and froze. The murmuring crowd seemed to blur. The music dulled, as if his senses had zeroed in on a single figure. There, standing at the top of the ballroom's ornate staircase, was Elena. She wore a wine-red gown that accentuated her lithe form, her dark hair cascading in loose waves over her shoulders. A hush seemed to envelop him, like a wind had swept through his chest. After all these months, it still felt unreal to see her in person. It wasn't just Elena's presence that paralyzed him. At her sides stood 4 small figures. Children. 2 girls and 2 boys, each no older than 5 or 6. And in the gleam of the chandelier's light, Daniel noticed the most striking detail. Each child's eyes were the same luminous green as his own. His mind reeled. This had to be some sort of trick of the light. It couldn't be. But as Elena stepped forward, guiding them gently down the staircase, the resemblance became even clearer. 4 children with the same color and shape of eyes as Daniel White. A jolt of disbelief electrified his veins. He'd never heard Elena mention children after they split. He hadn't heard a whisper from mutual acquaintances. And now, out of nowhere, these 4 kids appeared, each bearing his most distinctive feature. The glass in his hand trembled. The lively chatter of the ball receded to a low hum. All he could do was watch, transfixed, as Elena and those children moved further into the throng of people, heading unerringly in his direction. Daniel rose slowly, heart pounding. If Elena saw him, she gave no outward sign. She turned to exchange pleasantries with a member of the philanthropic committee, her polite smile carefully in place. The children clung to her hands, one of the little girls glancing shyly around the room. Up close, the resemblance was even more impossible to deny. Each child had inherited the green eyes that were so distinctive in Daniel's family. Each had some subtle aspect of his facial structure, a dimple on the cheek, the angular tilt of the jaw, the gentle curve of the nose. He approached his steps, halting uncertain how to break the barrier of polite society that kept them separated. A swirl of dancers momentarily blocked his path. By the time he emerged into an opening, Eleanor was there, mere feet away, her expression unreadable. "Hello, Daniel," she said quietly. Even amidst the swirl of music and conversation, her voice carried to him, as though they were the only 2 people in the room. Her accent seemed a touch more pronounced than usual, or perhaps he was just hyper-aware of every detail in this moment. He swallowed, noticing the children shift uncomfortably behind her. "Elena," he managed, forcing out the word. Another breath. "I didn't know you'd be here." Her eyes flickered. The invitation came through an old contact. And, well, I wanted to support the cause. Also, I thought it might be time. "Time," he repeated. He let the word linger, casting a glance at the children, who were now standing awkwardly, clearly unsure of what was happening between the grown-ups. Time for what? She hesitated, and her gaze fell to the floor. Then, drawing in a soft breath, she said, "Time for you to meet someone." Turning, she placed a gentle hand on each child's shoulder. "Mon chéri," she whispered to the boy on her right. This is Daniel. He's an old friend of mine." Daniel's heart twisted. Just an old friend. The boy looked up, wide-eyed, and offered a polite greeting. The rest followed suit, each voice small but distinct. 2 girls, 2 boys all in a line. His mind whirled. He couldn't form the words to ask the burning question, the question that screamed for an answer. Instead, he forced a cordial smile. "How do you do?" "We're fine," replied the eldest boy, whose hair was chestnut, just like Daniel's was as a child. "My name's Sebastian." The others introduced themselves, Madeline, Florence, and Thomas. The mention of their names hammered in the reality of their existence. Daniel extended his hand tentatively, and each child shook it with a curious, polite manner that seemed unusual for their ages. At last he turned to Elena with an expression that must have pleaded for some kind of explanation. She read it clearly. "Daniel," she said in a low tone, "I didn't plan on bringing them here to shock you. But I thought maybe this was the right time to tell you the truth." A tumult of anger, confusion, and heartbreak welled up in him. He glanced around, mindful of the many guests who might be watching. "Perhaps we should talk somewhere private." She nodded. "Yes, let's go to the side lounge. The children can stay with my nanny for a moment." She turned and beckoned a woman standing discreetly by the door, who hurried over and led the children away. A dull roar filled Daniel's ears as he and Elena glided along the perimeter of the ballroom. Guests parted to let them pass, and in their curious eyes, Daniel caught glimmers of speculation. Once they reached the smaller adjacent lounge, an ornate room with plush armchairs and soft lighting, they stepped inside and shut the door. The silence in the lounge was suffocating. Elena stood by a fireplace, golden light flickering against her dress. Daniel remained near the door, as though unsure whether to enter fully or bolt. Finally, she motioned him closer. His voice, when it emerged, trembled with barely contained emotion. Are they mine?" Elena studied him, eyes glistening. "Yes," she said, softly. "They are your children." The words struck Daniel like a physical blow. He staggered backward, pressing a hand against the door for support. For a moment it felt as though the world had inverted. The walls closed in his breath, caught in his chest. He tried to reconcile the reality of what he'd just heard with the life he'd been living alone. Believing fatherhood was a dream that died when his marriage ended. How? Why? He struggled for coherent words. A dozen questions fought for priority in his mind. Why wouldn't you tell me? Why 4 children? Elena. Tears welled in her eyes, and she clasped her hands together, the diamond bracelet on her wrist glinting in the firelight. It's complicated, Daniel. I was pregnant when the divorce became final. I discovered I was carrying twins at first. But there was more to it. It was a complicated pregnancy that I had to keep under the care of a specialized clinic in Geneva. She paused, swallowing hard. I couldn't bring myself to tell you. We were both so angry, so hurt. And after the funeral of your father, I felt like there was no place for me in your life. No place for my burdens. Burdens, he snapped, voice rising. They're children, Eleanor. Our children. You denied me the chance to be a father. She flinched. I know. I was selfish. I was scared. My father convinced me it might be better this way. He wanted me back in Switzerland, away from the complexities of our relationship. A pounding ache built behind Daniel's eyes, half fury, half heartbreak. He remembered Elena's father, André de la Montagne, proud, aristocratic, always disapproving of Daniel's American roots, but 4 of them. Elena, how old are they? She let out a trembling sigh. Sebastian and Madeline are 6. Florence and Thomas are 5. Yes, I was already pregnant once before the divorce process, and it was a complicated timeline. I found out I was expecting Florence and Thomas much later. The pregnancies were nearly back-to-back. I kept it hidden under the chaos of traveling, and I found ways to manage without letting you know. Daniel closed his eyes. Waves of disbelief washing over him. For all this time, you never once sent me a clue. Never told me you'd had them. Tears slipped down Eleanor's cheeks. I wanted to multiple times, but each time I gathered the courage, something stopped me. Your mother's health issues, the business expansions, and your anger. We left things so bitterly. I thought I could protect the children by keeping them away from a toxic environment. She shook her head. I see now. That was a mistake. Mistake. He barked a humorless laugh. It's so much more than that. Elena, you've robbed me of 6 years of fatherhood. I could have known them, raised them. She lowered her head. I'll never be able to make that up to you or to them, but I can try to fix it now if you'll let me. Daniel sank into an armchair, his limbs numb. This revelation turned his world inside out. For so long he'd thought fatherhood was an unreachable horizon, especially after the divorce. Now he had children, 4 living, breathing children who bore his eyes, his features, his lineage. He wanted to hate Eleanor, to rage at her for this injustice. But a quiet voice in his heart reminded him of how he'd once loved her, how complicated their parting had been. You should have told me, he whispered, pressing his palms to his eyes. I would have been there, no matter what was going on between us. That's a choice you made for both of us, and it wasn't yours to make alone. Elena knelt before him, voice quivering. I know. I'm sorry, Daniel. Please let's talk about how to move forward for the children's sake, if nothing else. He looked at her, seeing the raw fear and regret. In the space of a single evening, everything had changed, and he had no idea how to proceed in a way that would heal 6 years of damage. Overcome by the shock of Eleanor's confession, Daniel found his mind spiraling back in time. He remembered the bitter arguments that had led to their divorce, how his father's terminal illness put pressure on him to stay in New York, how Eliana, with her unstoppable career drive, had accepted an offer in Shanghai, simultaneously bristling at Daniel's pleas for her to return. He recalled the day he discovered the plane tickets she'd booked not just for business, but for a possible permanent move overseas. The day he confronted her, they both said things they could never take back. You'll never be satisfied with who I am, he'd accused. You don't want a partner, you want a trophy wife. She retorted, eyes blazing. They parted ways, each convinced the other was irredeemable, and in the swirl of attorneys and court proceedings, each attempted to carve out a future free from the other's disappointment. When the divorce finalized, Daniel had felt strangely numb, as if a piece of him had died. He sought solace in building Harrington and White into a powerhouse, throwing himself into philanthropic work, perhaps to fill the void left by the breakdown of his personal life. Now discovering Elena had been pregnant at the time, or just shortly thereafter, turned all his assumptions into lies. He remembered every phone call they missed, every email they'd let go unanswered. They had been so consumed by pride that neither had paused to consider the bigger picture that there might be unborn children deserving of unity and love. In the quiet lounge, Elena was still kneeling by his chair, eyes rimmed with tears. The faint sound of the Winter Ball's orchestra drifted in from beyond the door, an incongruous soundtrack to their shattering revelation. He said softly, "I need to know everything, Elena. No more secrets?" She nodded, standing and moving to the window where she looked out over the city lights. "I found out I was pregnant with Sebastian and Madeline about 4 months before we filed for divorce. But we were in the midst of the biggest fight of our lives. I was traveling for work. I felt alone, and my father persuaded me to stay quiet until I could come home to Switzerland. He never liked you, Daniel, and he wanted me to raise the children by myself." She turned to him, voice trembling. But then I realized I was expecting again Florence and Thomas shortly after the birth of the twins. The pregnancies were a medical miracle and complication. The doctors told me the second was an unusual overlapping pregnancy, extremely rare. I was terrified. I didn't know if I'd survive. There were complications. I was hospitalized for months in Geneva. During that time, my father kept everything hidden from the outside world. I was too weak to fight him. Daniel listened, each word burning into his soul. He envisioned Elena alone in a Swiss clinic battling a perilous pregnancy, while he, thousands of miles away, cursed her name for not being present in his life. A complicated swirl of sorrow, pity, and anger gripped him. And after the births, you just never thought it important enough to pick up the phone. Her eyes flashed with regret. I was scared. I was told you'd moved on, that you resented me. And in truth, I was ashamed for deceiving you. Yes, I let pride and fear dictate my actions. I thought maybe if I raised them alone, I could avoid all that heartbreak, all that anger. But it's been a burden on my conscience, especially as the children have grown and started asking questions about their father. Daniel closed his eyes, taking a moment to let her words settle. He pictured 4 children in a Swiss estate, asking, "Where's Daddy?" and receiving no real answers. The heartbreak coiled tighter in his chest. With trembling conviction, he rose to his feet. "I have to meet them properly. They need to know who I am." Elena moved to open the door. "Of course. They're just next door with the nanny. Let's go." Stepping into the side corridor, Daniel felt the warm overhead lights shining down on him with an almost glaring intensity. The sweet, festive music in the background felt surreal. He was about to meet his children for the first time in the midst of a glittering winter ball. In a small antechamber, the 4 children sat in a circle with their nanny, a petite woman named Dominique, who was reading them a story to keep them occupied. As soon as Elena and Daniel entered, the children looked up, their wide green eyes fixed on Daniel. Madeline, the older girl, peered at him with curiosity. "You look like me," she said quietly, as if discovering something extraordinary. Daniel knelt, feeling tears prick at his eyes. "I guess we do look alike," he replied. Sebastian, the older boy, placed his hands on his hips with a surprising note of confidence. "Maman says you're very important in New York. Are you a prince or something?" Daniel couldn't help a small smile. "No, I'm not a prince. I just help run a company. And I do some work helping others." Florence, a shy girl, nestled closer to her nanny. "Are you a good man?" she asked, her voice small. The question speared Daniel's heart. He glanced at Elena, who was silently watching, tears shimmering on her lashes. Carefully he answered, "I try to be. I'm not always perfect, but I do my best." Thomas, the youngest, touched Daniel's tie. "I like your tie," he said, smiling. Elena knelt beside Daniel, resting a hand on Thomas's shoulder. "Kids, I want you to know that Daniel is someone very important to me. And to you." She paused, her gaze flickering to Daniel. "He's your father." The words settled over the room. There was no thunderous reaction, no immediate meltdown, but rather a kind of hushed awe. Madeline was the first to speak again. "That means you love us." Daniel swallowed the lump in his throat. "More than I can say. Even though we're just meeting, I already feel that you're the most precious gift I could have." Sebastian studied Daniel with a pensive look. "Then why didn't you come see us before?" A flash of guilt twisted inside Daniel, though the fault wasn't truly his. But how could he explain that? He glanced at Elena, who placed a gentle hand on Sebastian's shoulder. "That's my fault," she said. "I didn't tell him where we were. Sometimes adults make mistakes." Her admission left the children quiet. They seemed to accept it with a resilience that only children possess. Slowly, Thomas reached up and touched Daniel's hair, as if to confirm he was real. Daniel felt his heart break and mend all at once. He opened his arms hesitantly, offering an embrace. One by one, the children stepped forward. Madeline first, then Sebastian, then the others. Their small arms wrapped around him, and for a moment he closed his eyes, letting the warmth of their presence wash over him. He didn't notice the tall figure standing in the corridor until someone cleared his throat. Daniel looked up to see James Harrington, his business partner and longtime friend, wearing an expression of utter shock. Daniel James said, struggling for composure, I've been looking for you, but I see you're preoccupied." His eyes roved over the 4 children. "Are these?" Daniel nodded, still holding on to the children. "Yes." "Mine." James stood there, mouth slightly open. But he rallied quickly, offering a small congratulatory nod. "I see. Well, I'll leave you to your reunion." He turned to go, then paused, giving Daniel a pointed look that seemed to say, "We need to talk." Daniel knew with a sinking feeling that his entire life, personal and professional, had just undergone a seismic shift. Everything from finances to living arrangements to his carefully curated public image would change once it became public knowledge that he had 4 children he'd never mentioned. And in his mind, he couldn't help wondering if more secrets were lurking behind Elena's sudden reappearance. Later that evening, after ensuring the children were settled in a quiet corner, with Dominique, Danielle, and Elena slipped away to find more privacy, they went up a short flight of stairs, ending up on a balcony overlooking the ballroom floor. Below them, the party continued in full swing, glittering gowns, twinkling lights, the hum of polite conversation. He stared down at the swirling crowd, then turned to Elena. "This is a lot to take in, Elena. Are you certain no uncertainties about their paternity?" She flinched at the question. "They're yours, Daniel. I swear it on everything I hold dear." His face softened. "I want to believe you. But you have to understand my perspective. You hid them from me for 6 years. Her cheeks turned pink. "I understand. If you want a paternity test, I won't stop you. Anything to give you peace of mind." He nodded, feeling a pang of guilt for doubting her. "I'm sorry. It's just, this is so unexpected." She waved off the apology with a trembling hand. "I deserve your suspicion, but I have no reason to lie now. My father, he urged me to cut you out of our lives entirely. He was never going to let you know about them. But they kept asking. They wanted to know why they didn't have a daddy like other children. And as they grew older, their resemblance to you grew more obvious." A wave of anger coursed through Daniel. "Your father, he's the one who convinced you to hide them from me." She She shook her head. I let him. I was emotionally weak, recovering from the pregnancies far from home. I can't blame him entirely. The mention of André de la Montagne sparked an old resentment in Daniel. Elena's father had never hidden his contempt for Daniel's lack of noble pedigree and the American approach to business. But to manipulate a situation this profoundly was beyond cruel. You realize this is going to change everything, Daniel said. I need to speak to a lawyer, figure out custody financial arrangements. And the children, how do we help them adjust? Elena's face showed weariness, but also relief that Daniel was taking responsibility instead of pushing them away. I've already spoken to a lawyer about my return to the States. I'm prepared to stay in New York if that's what it takes. He eyed her wary. And your job? She sighed. I stepped back from my international projects. Right now, I'm focusing on philanthropic work. My father doesn't approve, but that doesn't matter anymore. My priority is the children. Daniel let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. He recalled how they once dreamed of having children, raising them in a home full of love and mutual respect. That dream had crumbled. Now faced with reality, they had to figure out how to pick up the pieces and build something stable for 4 innocent lives. How do we start? He asked softly. Elena's lips curved into a sad smile. Perhaps by letting them know we both love them, that we are both here for them. Everything else can come later. For tonight, let's just be there for them. As the evening wore on, Daniel felt guilt creeping in. The 4 children, his children, were clearly bewildered by this sudden introduction. While they bravely tried to interact with Daniel, he sensed their uncertainty. After all, in their young minds, he was a stranger who happened to share their eyes, face shape, and last name. He tried to be jovial with them, kneeling to their level, listening to their half-formed stories about Switzerland, about their school, about the snow-capped mountains they missed. But inside, he was consumed by a swirl of emotions. He'd missed their first steps, first words, birthdays, 6 years of precious moments. And then came another jolt. During a lull, Madeline quietly asked, "Is Hans coming too?" Daniel glanced at Elena. Confusion etched on his face. Elena's expression stiffened. "We'll talk about that later, sweetheart," she said hastily. Hands Daniel pressed. Elena hesitated, then cleared her throat. I've been seeing someone, a colleague from work. It's not serious, but the children know him. He was around as a friend. A sharp pang of jealousy, anger, and betrayal shot through Daniel. That was only natural. Eleanor was no longer his wife, and she had every right to date. But the thought that another man had been a figure in his children's lives, even if just tangentially, set his teeth on edge. He fought to keep his voice calm. "So he's been around the children," Eleanor nodded, looking away. "They like him, Daniel. He's been kind to them." Daniel swallowed the bitterness rising in his throat. "I see," Sebastian piped up. "Hans takes us sledding. He helped me make a birdhouse once." The image of another man, stepping into fatherly roles, stung Daniel deeply. Yet he forced a polite nod. "That's nice of him." Elena quickly changed the subject, offering the children a plate of mini pastries from a passing waiter. But Daniel's thoughts lingered on Hans. He wondered if Hans had become a paternal figure, if the children would look to him instead of Daniel. By the time the ball was winding down, Daniel had endured the well-meaning small talk of acquaintances who admired the adorable children, asking whose they were. He offered vague smiles and quick answers, uncertain how to handle such personal inquiries. Outside, the snowfall had intensified, blanketing the city in white. Daniel stood with the children under the glowing street lamps, waiting as a valet brought around 2 cars. He felt an unspoken tension with Elena by his side. They were 2 estranged individuals, forced back together by the existence of these 4 precious lives. "Where are you staying tonight?" he asked her. "At the Ritz, for now," she replied. "I didn't know how you'd react, so I didn't make longer-term arrangements." He nodded. "That's fine. Look, tomorrow I'd like to spend more time with them. Can we arrange that?" Elena studied him, relief softening her features. "Of course. They need to know their father." Daniel forced a tiny smile at the word father, still grappling with the weight of it. Then, as the children climbed into the waiting SUV, Daniel laid a gentle hand on Elena's arm. "Thank you for telling me, even if it's late." She gave him a somber nod. "And I'm sorry." In the hush of the swirling snow, Daniel watched as the vehicle pulled away. He stood there a long time, staring into the winter night, silently vowing that whatever happened next, he wouldn't abandon those children. No matter how painful the transition, they were his, and he was theirs. The following morning, Daniel woke in his penthouse apartment overlooking Central Park. Sleep had eluded him for much of the night, visions of 4 bright-eyed faces populating his restless dreams. He rose early, brewing a pot of strong coffee as he mulled over the next step. He called his mother Carol White, who lived in a quiet suburb in Connecticut. It was time she heard the news. When he told her she had 4 grandchildren, the coffee mug almost slipped from his hand as he heard her reaction. First she stammered in disbelief, then sobbed, then erupted in joy mingled with confusion and a tinge of anger at Eleanor's secrecy. Despite everything, Carol couldn't wait to meet them. Daniel also placed a call to James Harrington, who demanded an explanation. They arranged to meet in the Harrington and White boardroom that afternoon, once Daniel had a chance to visit with his newly discovered family. A text beeped on Daniel's phone just as he stepped into the hallway. "Elena, we're at the Central Park Zoo with the kids. Meet us here if you can." Daniel hurried to dress, donning a casual sweater and coat. The crisp winter air bit at his cheeks as he strode down the block, weaving past holiday shoppers and carriage horses. The sense of surreal anticipation made his heart pound. At the zoo's entrance, he found Elena and the children watching seals swim in a large tank. The children spotted him first, waving excitedly. His chest warmed at their enthusiasm. He approached with a smile. "Hey guys," Sebastian grabbed his hand. "Look at the seals, Papa." The casual use of Papa startled Daniel, but he squeezed the boy's hand in response, a lump forming in his throat. Elena noticed his reaction. "They adapt quickly," she murmured, eyes bright with unshed tears. They strolled along, admiring the polar bears and penguins, occasionally stopping to buy hot cocoa. Daniel tried to soak in every detail, how Madeline tugged on his sleeve to show him her favorite animals. How Thomas giggled when the penguins waddled, how Florence shyly stuck close to Elena, how Sebastian asked a million questions about everything. They were a family moving in a loose cluster, forging a tender sense of unity. Yet Daniel couldn't help noticing a shadow in Elena's gaze, as if she were keeping another secret. After a while, Sebastian raced ahead. "Papa, there's an ice sculpture over there." Elena and Daniel lagged behind, exchanging a look. "They're incredible," Daniel remarked. "Smart, curious. I'm amazed at how they each have their own personality." Elena smiled. "You would have made a wonderful father, Daniel." He regarded her intently. "Is there anything else you haven't told me?" Because right now I need the truth. Everything. She sighed, glancing away. There is something else, but I wasn't sure how to bring it up. It's about Thomas. He's had some health issues since he was born prematurely. Alarm raced through Daniel. Health issues. Is he okay? He's mostly fine, Elena said quickly. But he has a minor heart condition. The doctors say it's manageable with medication and monitoring. He might need surgery in the future, but there's a good chance he won't. Daniel's face paled. My God, Elena, you should have told me. I'd have been there for him. She placed a hand on his arm. I know. This is what I regret most. I'm ready to set things right now. I've brought them here so we can live in New York for a while, see specialists if needed, and ensure he gets the best care. I'll bear any cost if you want. Daniel's response was immediate. No. We'll share it. He's my son, our son. I'll do whatever it takes to help him. Emotions swarmed in Eleanor's eyes. Relief mingled with sorrow. Thank you. Their conversation was cut short by the children's excited calls. They hurried over, trying to smile and laugh as if everything was normal. But for Daniel, each moment with the children was a reminder of what he'd missed and of the challenges to come. After the zoo, they decided to warm up at a nearby cafe, a cozy establishment known for its artisan pastries. The children devoured mini croissants while Elena sipped a cappuccino, and Daniel hovered protectively, noticing every detail about his new family members. Between bites of pastry, Florence hesitantly asked Papa, "Do you have a nice house?" Daniel chuckled softly. "I have an apartment. It's big enough for all of you if you ever want to visit." Madeline's face lit up. "Can we see it?" Eleanor shot Daniel a questioning glance. "Are you sure you're ready for that?" He took a moment before nodding. "Yes. I'd like them to see where I live. I have a spare room that can be turned into something for them." So it was decided. They gathered their things and took a quick taxi ride to Daniel's penthouse overlooking Central Park. The building's doorman, Mr. Bartholomew, nearly dropped his cap upon seeing Daniel leading 4 children by the hand. "Elena. Kids?" "This is home," Daniel said, opening his front door. The foyer was sleek and modern, perhaps too sterile for children's tastes. Sebastian's eyes widened at the floor-to-ceiling windows, while Madeline squealed with delight at the view of the snowy treetops and distant skyscrapers. They spread out, exploring. Elena followed them, pointing out paintings and artifacts Daniel had collected. Her gaze stopped on a photo of Daniel's parents. "Your mother will be ecstatic," she said. "She's already invited all of you to spend Christmas in Connecticut," Daniel replied. A flicker of fear touched Elena's face. "It might be overwhelming to meet your entire family so soon." He shrugged gently. "They're the children's family too, Elena. We can take it slow. I just want them to feel welcomed." She nodded, watching Thomas run giggling across the living room's polished floor. They deserve a big family Christmas. They've never really had that. A warm feeling grew in Daniel's chest. Maybe despite the heartbreak, they could form a family dynamic, if not as husband and wife, then at least as coring co-parents. Suddenly, Eleanor's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, her face paling. She excused herself, stepping into the hallway. Daniel lingered, an uneasy feeling creeping over him. A few minutes later, Elena returned, face ashen. "What's wrong?" he asked. "It's Hans," she said, voice tight. "He's in New York. He wants to see me and the children." Daniel felt a sudden wave of protectiveness, almost territorial. "He has no claim on them. I'm their father." Eleanor placed a hand on his shoulder. "It's not that simple. The kids know him. They care for him. But I'm here now, Daniel insisted, trying to quell the anger. I won't just stand by while some stranger plays father. She looked torn. I understand. I'll talk to him. Just, please don't make this more complicated than it has to be. Daniel exhaled, controlling his temper. Fine. But I want to be present for any meeting. The children need stability, not confusion. Elena nodded, and the tension in her shoulders seemed to ease. But the mere prospect of Hans stepping into the picture threatened to upend the fragile dynamic Daniel and Elena were beginning to forge. Over the next few days, Daniel spent every spare moment with his children. He took them to the Museum of Natural History, where they marveled at dinosaur skeletons and celestial exhibits. He showed them Rockefeller Center's towering Christmas tree, letting them watch the ice skaters gliding beneath twinkling lights. Those days were some of the happiest Daniel had experienced in a long time, yet a lingering worry about Hans hovered in the back of his mind. Would Hans try to disrupt his reconnection with the children? One afternoon, while Elena and the children were napping in their suite at the Ritz, Daniel went to his office to meet James Harrington. Sitting in the sleek boardroom with glass walls overlooking Manhattan, Daniel braced for James's barrage of questions, so James began leaning forward. 4 kids. Daniel. You have no idea the shockwaves this is causing among our investors and clients. They're all calling me asking if there's some scandal or if we've been hiding something. Daniel pinched the bridge of his nose. I didn't know, James. Believe me, this was as much a surprise to me as it was to the world. James studied him intently. Do you believe Elena's story? Daniel nodded slowly. Yes. She's done a DNA test already. Or at least she's offered it. I believe her. They have my eyes, for God's sake. James exhaled. All right. So how are we handling this from a PR standpoint? Daniel thought for a moment. We release a brief statement saying I've recently become aware of my children that I intend to fulfill all my responsibilities as a father, and that the details remain private. That should suffice. I don't want to exploit my kids' private lives. James agreed. But be aware the media might spin it. Elena was high profile in the finance world too. They'll probably dig up old dirt. Daniel nodded, crossing his arms. Let them dig. I just care about the kids right now. They're my top priority. James softened, offering Daniel a supportive smile. You've always wanted a family, man. Maybe this is your chance. Just be careful with Elena. She's unpredictable. Daniel gave a mirthless chuckle. Trust me, I know. After the meeting, Daniel returned to the Ritz, a sense of determination fueling him. He wanted to talk to Elena about officially moving back to the US with the children. But when he arrived, he found her in tears in the lounge. She looked up, eyes puffy. Hans. He confronted me. He demanded to see the children. He's threatening legal action, claiming he's acted as a de facto parent. Daniel's blood ran cold. He has no legal claim. He's not their father. Elena sniffed, wiping her cheeks. He's not listed on any birth certificates, of course, but he's threatening to tell the tabloids about everything about how I hid the children from you, about the details of our finances. He wants money, Daniel. Daniel ground his teeth. So he's blackmailing you. She nodded miserably. I broke things off with him as soon as I decided to come to New York. He didn't take it well. Now he's furious. Rage coursed through Daniel, but he forced himself to remain calm. We'll handle it. I'll talk to my lawyers, and we'll put a stop to his threats. The children won't be used as pawns. Eleanor looked at him with gratitude. I'm sorry, Daniel. It seems every time you try to fix things, I bring another complication. He gently took her hand. We'll get through it. Together. For the kids. That evening, an unexpected phone call shattered the fragile calm. Hans called Daniel directly. His tone was aggressive, laced with bitterness. You think you can just waltz back into Elena's life and claim those children, Hans spat. I've been the one helping them for years. Daniel clenched his jaw. They're my children, Hans. My blood. Hans laughed harshly. Your blood, sure. But I was there when Eleanor needed help. If you had any decency, you'd let me at least see them. Daniel paused, wrestling with the primal urge to tell Hans to stay away forever. But he also recognized that the children knew Hans. Forcing them to lose him abruptly might be traumatic. We can discuss a supervised meeting, Daniel conceded. But if you try anything, any attempt at blackmail, I'll see you in court. Hans scoffed. You think your money and power can scare me? Elena's father tried that. He didn't succeed. Daniel ended the call, fury boiling in his veins. Elena, who stood nearby, watched him with anxious eyes. We'll do a supervised meeting, he told her. It might help the children's transition if they can say goodbye or set boundaries. But he's not going to threaten us anymore. She nodded, tears of relief shining. Thank you for handling this. They set the meeting for the next day in the presence of lawyers at a neutral law office. The children arrived with Elena subdued and confused. Hans was already there, face pinched with anger. When the children ran to greet him, Daniel's stomach twisted. Hans cast a smug glance Daniel's way, as if to say, see, they're mine in spirit. But Sebastian, after hugging Hans briefly, hurried to Daniel's side. Papa, are you okay? Daniel's heart soared at the simple question the child's concern for him. I'm fine, buddy, he murmured, tousling Sebastian's hair. The negotiations that followed were tense. Hans wanted continued contact, threatening to leak scandalous information. Eleanor confessed that Hans had personal emails and financial records that could be damaging if taken out of context. Daniel's lawyer threatened Hans with a defamation suit if he went public. Finally, they reached a precarious agreement. Hans would receive a severance of sorts, a lump sum from Elena's personal funds, and would agree to no future contact with the children unless they requested it themselves once they were of age. It wasn't an ideal solution, but it would stave off immediate scandal and harassment. The children seemed unsettled as Hans gave them a final hug. Thomas clung to him for a moment, tears glistening in his eyes. Daniel's chest tightened at the sight, but he tried to remain stoic. Hans left abruptly, slamming the door behind him. Outside the office, Eleanor knelt to comfort the children, tears streaming down her cheeks. Daniel joined them, feeling the weight of these events pressing down on their small shoulders. In that moment, he promised himself he would never let them feel abandoned again. In the weeks that followed, life settled into a new rhythm. Elena and the children moved into a rented townhouse near Daniel's apartment. Daniel spent his weekends showing them American traditions, like decorating a Christmas tree, baking cookies, and practicing English holiday carols. The day finally came for the children to meet Carol White, their grandmother in Connecticut. Despite the tension and swirling emotions, the meeting was a joyous occasion. Carol wept openly as she embraced each of her grandchildren, scolding Elena only briefly for keeping them hidden for so long. Christmas morning found them all gathered in Carol's cozy living room. Snow fell softly outside. The children squealed over presents, and Elena found herself welcomed warmly, surprisingly so, by Carol's motherly grace. Daniel dressed in a comfy sweater, took time to reflect on how drastically his life had changed in mere weeks. He now had the family he had once dreamed about, though not in the way he'd imagined. Eleanor and Daniel still had much to resolve. Their romantic relationship remained uncertain. Old wounds and betrayals lingered, but so did a lingering thread of love. They'd begun counseling, determined to co-parent effectively. Whether or not they would reconcile as a couple remained to be seen. One late night after the children had gone to bed, Daniel and Elena sat on his penthouse balcony. The city lights twinkled below the hush of snow, making the moment feel magical. Elena leaned her head on Daniel's shoulder. "Do you think we could ever be a family again?" she asked. Daniel slipped an arm around her, 1,000 thoughts flooding his mind. "I think we already are a family," he said softly. "Maybe not the conventional kind, but we'll figure it out." Elena gazed at him, a small smile curving her lips. "Thank you," she whispered, "for giving us another chance." He closed his eyes, inhaling the crisp winter air. "Thank you for letting me be a father." They sat there for a long while, listening to the distant hum of the city, their hearts brimming with the complicated, fragile hope of a new beginning. Thank you for joining us on this emotional journey of heartbreak, hidden children, and the fragile hope of new beginnings. Daniel's story reminds us that even through betrayal and pain, love and forgiveness can lead to unexpected miracles. If this touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Your support means the world. See you in the next story.